another one of your interests, and,
Right.
and you've kind of gotten into that, but we've just seen a huge meltdown over the past 12, 15 months. Are you still a believer?
So if we'd been sitting here together in 2002, we probably were. You would have asked me, the internet. We've just seen this huge meltdown in the last 12 to 15 months. Are you still a believer? Right?
Yep.
And so the answer is yes. The answer is yes. The answer is yes. Now the digital currency solution is the most important technological advance I've seen since the internet. It has the capacity to do lots more, but it certainly has the capacity to enable us to move anything of value around the world at the speed of light at no cost. It has three components. It has a token of value, which is called the Bitcoin. It has an accounting mechanism, which is called the blockchain. But the most important piece, which is one that people aren't focusing on, is the protocol. The underlying protocol by which we agree to conduct these transactions. So you use a series of protocols every day, and you don't even think about them. You don't think about the internet protocol, you don't think about the simple mail technology protocol, you don't think about the file transfer protocol, you don't think about the high text translation protocol. I go through them, right? You just make use of the technology and the protocols make it work. The people who really understand what's going on with digital currencies understand that putting these protocols in place, the blockchain protocol, the Ethereum protocol, the Ripple protocol, the Ripple protocol, the Ripple protocol, and then enabling those protocols to cause transactions to occur. And then those transactions can be defined very broadly as not just moving things of value, but anything that's got an information content, is extraordinarily transformative. The focus on the value of the token is distracting and uninformative.
So maybe now's a good time to invest in it.
I'm investing in the companies. I have owned some of the tokens on and off, but I'm investing in the companies that use the technology to drive this transformational change.
You've also invested in Fintech?
Sure, yes.
And what does that mean? What does Fintech actually mean?
Well, you know, I remember Ted Turner once said, I was into cable before cable was cool.
Right.
I was into Fintech before Fintech was cool.
Okay.
NASDAQ is Fintech.
Right.
Bringing together financial services and technology to drive value to customers. So over the course of my business career, I helped to build the NASDAQ. I helped to build what's now called TD Ameritrade. Those are both Fintech companies that use technology to deliver financial services. And right now I'm involved with a company that we discussed earlier called Virtu, which is the world's largest electronic market maker that makes markets and securities around the world at the speed of light at less than penny spreads.
Do you see changing what you're doing right now, or do you like this sort of portfolio life that you have?
Do you have any ideas? Do you have a recommendation for me?
Sail around the world?
No, thank you.
Okay.
No, look, I'm enjoying very much what I'm doing because I have a life where I'm able to be engaged as an investor. I predict interest rates, equity prices, oil prices, and elections. So I'm not going to do any of those today, right? But what's going on with the equity markets? I think, in a very distilled way, the two major foundational elements, monetary policy and fiscal policy, are right now both stimulative. Right? Monetary policy, what I mean by stimulative, are both pointing toward higher interest rates. So monetary policy is in the process of a big regime change from lower for longer to normalization, which means the balance sheet's reducing, interest rates are going up, and that's influencing the equity markets. Fiscal policy on top of that has added a huge amount of new financing demands because it's a borrow and spend plan. So the borrowing roughly about $1.5 trillion over 10 years to finance this. That's increasing interest rates. So those two major influences are driving interest rates up, and interest rates are bad for equities, right? And so that's the major thing to think about. Then you layer on top of that all of the issues and uncertainties associated with increasing the dollar, which is one of the secondary effect of interest rates, which causes a reduction in U.S. exports. The consequent slowdown in growth of the countries that export to the United States, including but not only China. and then geopolitical uncertainty associated with things like, but not only, the tariffs. And it's no surprise that the markets are unusually volatile at this moment. You asked about the economy. We can go overall. The markets, one of the things people don't understand is they say, well, the economy's strong, what is the market saying? You have to understand that economic data is backward looking. The growth for the fourth quarter was X. The markets don't care about that. What the markets care about is what the growth for the coming year is. So the markets are forecasting while the economic data looks backward. So the markets are clearly forecasting a set of economic problems over the course of the coming year that are nervous-making. The biggest piece of that is that the hugely stimulative fiscal policy of the last year with that ill-considered tax cut was a one-time thing. So that's now in the base and that's not going anywhere. And then you add to that the issues we talked about, plus the question of how long can this recovery last. And the markets seem to be forecasting some weakness for the coming year.
So are you more concerned with tougher comps in 2019 or the actual possibility of a recession? Or neither?
Well, yeah, as I say, I'm not going to be a fool to try to get into the level of forecasting.
Right.
But I think the coming year has to the extent that we have to disaggregate the economy and the marketplace. To the extent that we've had a problem over the last year, almost exactly a year ago, I was warning people that I thought asset prices had gotten to be too high and volatility was too muted. Of course, over the course of this past year, I think we solved that problem, at least the volatility element of it. But if there is a problem in the economy in the coming year, it will be caused by one or both of two things. One is some slowdown of corporate activity, and the other would be some increase in interest rates that brings equity prices down even further. It feels to me, if there is a problem like that, it feels to me more like what happened in 2000 and 2001, where there would be a correction of equity prices and maybe a small wealth effect associated with that, but then a pretty quick recovery from it, as opposed to something like 2008, where there was a huge debt burden that weighed on the economy for 10 years.
Let's talk about the tech sector specifically, Glenn. And you said that this sector grows faster than the economy, so it's sort of the investment thesis of your lifetime. But is that still the case in all the problems we're hearing about social media and possible government regulation? What's your take on the business these days?
Well, that's good question. So let's disaggregate that into a couple of things. There's a public policy issue out there, which is around the whole set of privacy questions and net neutrality questions that we've dealt with over the last couple of years. The people who think about these things tell me there'll almost certainly be some form of legislation of that this year. My view is that could turn out to be a very good thing because it removes the uncertainty associated with that and then allows those companies to reset and get back to growth again. So I think that's probably a necessary thing, and it's not unlike what happened to IBM at the end of its rapid growth phase and Microsoft at the end of its rapid growth phase. You know, the Facebook, Twitter, Googles are kind of in that same kind of period where they're subject to regulatory scrutiny. That's public policy issues that create some uncertainty. But with respect to the technology economy, if you had bought the major tech winners, the FANG group, at their peak price before each of the internet bubble and before the great financial crisis, and held, you would have made a large amount of money. Look at Amazon, for instance. Amazon didn't get back to its price in 1999 until 2007. But today, that 2007 price is a fraction of where it is today. Mm-hmm. So if you invest in a great company and own it for a very long period of time, you're going to do just fine.
Let's switch over to Washington a little bit.
Do we have to?
Yes, we do. A couple of questions here, Glenn. So what is your take on how President Trump is handling the economy to the extent that he oversees it? And what is the best way for a chief executive to handle Trump, a Trump policy, if you will?
Look, I think the economic policies of this administration have been irresponsible to the point of dangerous. The tax cut was a huge error, in my view. I was all for tax reform. I think that, however, cutting taxes and not paying for it, debt financing a tax cut. It used to be the Democrats were held to be irresponsible because they were for tax and spend. What the Republicans have done in this administration is borrow and spend. They haven't even had the intellectual honesty of actually raising the taxes to pay for their spending. There's some sort of myth out there that the tax cut's going to pay for itself. It obviously hasn't. We have the largest deficits during a recovery in American history, even as a percent of GDP. So we're just borrowing a huge amount of money. That's going to put a massive amount of pressure on the on the interest rates and equity markets, as we talked about in the past. The trade policies are remarkably ill-advised. Going after our allies in Canada and Mexico the way they did, and I know that's behind us now, but that was extraordinarily ill-advised. The tariffs are hurting on China, are hurting American manufacturers more than hurting the Chinese. Do we need to adjust our relationship with China around areas like intellectual property policy and technology policy? Of course. How do you do that? You do that by getting China's trading partners to negotiate with them as a bloc. What was that called? That was called TPP. The Trump administration's actions to withdraw from TPP without extracting any concession from China was a huge blunder. There's an opportunity out there right now, but the way we manage our allies, I think, is going to be a very tough thing to do, which is to turn TPP into a negotiating bloc with China and really go after these problems in a way that can fix them. They're not doing that. The third is we have a set of, Republicans used to recoil from industrial policy. Government can't pick winners. But we are picking winners. We're picking the coal industry, the nuclear industry, the aluminum industry, and the steel industry as our winners, right? And while China is investing in smart infrastructure, artificial intelligence, and quantum computing, as well as solar. There are more Americans who work in the solar industry than work in the coal industry in the United States, but we're not thinking in those terms. So I think if you go across the economic policies of this administration, they're plainly wrong-headed.
That is a list of qualms you have there, no doubt about that, Glenn. So what should the Democrats do about this? I mean, there's a wealth of candidates. How is this going to play out as we get towards 2020?
I'm not a political prognosticator, but I think that if I was asked about the economic policy aspects of that, what I would say is we need to get back to some degree of fiscal responsibility. Not increase taxes, but roll back these tax cuts to get to the Obama-Bush level of taxes. Then try to move forward toward tax reform that makes our tax system more competitive. That's kind of one. The second is that I think we need to have a significant investment in our infrastructure in our economy. Infrastructure is a very, very tough issue because more than 90% of it occurs at the state and local level, and it takes a very long time to get it done. I would advocate as a consequence of that an infrastructure bank that could, at the federal level, not unlike the Import-Export Bank, that can provide financing. And I would focus our research and development budgets on newer technologies so that we could compete with China in the future in things like AI and quantum computing. And I would put a huge amount of emphasis on getting our education system right so we can prepare the next generation for the future. Those are some of the things I would do.
You served in Washington, though, and you know what the environment's like. It's actually much worse than when you served there.